Hello and welcome to the webinar. This is a manufacturing public policy update from One Voice for Manufacturing, National Tooling and Machining Association, and the Precision Metal Forming Association's combined advocacy effort in Washington, D.C. I'm Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. And on the webinar today, we have Paul Nathanson, also with PRG at Bracewell. We have Omar Nashashibi with Inside Beltway, and we have Christian Richter on the webinar today. For folks who participated in the fly-in, you met Christian. Christian is a lobbyist here in DC, works on manufacturing metal forming issues, works closely with Omar here in DC. Today's webinar is sponsored by Federated Insurance, and we are glad to have Jack West with us on the webinar today to give us a brief message from Federated. Jack, let me turn to you.
Well, thank you very much, Caitlin. As Caitlin indicated, my name is Jack West, and on behalf of Federated, we are excited for the opportunity to sponsor today's webinar. For over 120 years, Federated has supported and promoted the association movement, and today is exclusively recommended by over 500 state and national associations and buying groups. Federated is extremely proud of our partnerships with both PMA, along with several of the NTMA chapter organizations. We applaud both PMA and NTMA for their efforts in arranging the One Voice in Washington webinar series. And we look forward to today's webinar and continuing our mission to help the members of the association's businesses succeed. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Jack. And thank you to Federated Insurance for sponsoring the webinar and partnering with NTMA and PMA on this project. So as you can see on this slide, we have lots of content to cover. As I always say, we won't be talking about every single thing that is on this slide. But we will, this is what is in the deck, so you can always refer back to this slide when you go back to watch this webinar or click through the slide deck and find out more information. You know, I am glad that we are having this webinar because when I'm watching the news, even as someone who is pretty plugged into these issues, it is like tariffs are on, tariffs are off. Maybe they're suspended, maybe they're back on. And I'm sure there are lots of folks who are on today who want to know the same. So Omar, I am sure we are going to cover that issue, also things that are going on on the Hill. I'm going to turn to you, let us know where we're going to start, and then tell people, you know, what they have coming in the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, we've updated the trade section 3 times in 24 hours. That's just how often it's moving.
Great, perfect.
Yeah.
So as you're talking, I'll go ahead and get ready to update it again, because surely we'll need that before you get to that section.
That's right. And there is going to be a Musk-Trump press conference, so we'll see how that interrupts our day as well. We're going to get over to, obviously, what happened in trade policy shortly. Let's run through the Hill work, especially since we do now have a work product that came out of the U.S. House of Representatives. As we get started, as always, please type in any questions that you've got in the question and answer box. If it's timely to the slide on which we're on, we'll go ahead and try to address it at that time, and then, of course, collect them and address them towards the end as well. But starting with what the House did. The House of Representatives has moved on what we call the tax bill. The tax bill has a number of other items in it that deals with immigration, energy, border, medical, defense, you name it. It's going to be the one large legislation that seems to move in this Congress. Most importantly are the tax provisions, without which, if they didn't move something this year, you'd see some significant tax increases that you've all heard from us. Please don't start planning your tax strategies around this legislation. This is only passing the House. We're still dealing with it over in the Senate. I had 5 meetings on the Hill yesterday, especially on the Senate side. We heard some different ideas of what they have in mind on taxes. So we're going to use this slide deck as more of a baseline on the tax provisions rather than where we think we're going to end up with a few exceptions. On research and development, this is section 174. Reminder, this is not the R&D tax credit. Under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they gave you full expensing for 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And then starting in January of 2022, it converted rather to an amortization over 5 years in capitalization. We've obviously been fighting against that. It's costing the average One Voice member about $250,000 a year in added tax liability. To that effect, what this legislation does, retroactive to January 1 of 2025, it eliminates the requirement for amortization and capitalization and allows you to immediately expense your R&D activities through December 31st of 2028. That elimination of amortization and the expensing, that's together in the same provision. The same timeline for bonus depreciation, which is currently dropped to 40% and will drop to 20% at the end of the year. The House legislation that passed is now going to bring that back up to 100%, and it's going to keep bonus there for full expensing for CapEx through, again, 2029. I'm sorry, eliminating R&D amortization is through December 31st, 2029. Those are those provisions. They're retro to January 1 of 25, and then they go all the way through of 2029. One thing that we've been working on in separate legislation, and this is new and was not in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, on Section 179, small business expensing, on that provision, we were able to include that and more than double it and get the expensing now up to $2.5 million before it starts to phase down to the $4 million number. That's pretty significant because when combined with the increase in the small business gross receipts test that was included in this House bill, that increases from 25 million to 80 million. That'll classify 80 million and under for small businesses that can now claim the 179 small business expensing, of which 87% of our members already do. So now this is going to really be quite significant for those that are making investments. The other one in here that the president wanted deals with depreciation of qualified property. That's basically manufacturing facilities that are constructed between January 1 and then the end of his term, December 31, 2028, and then placed into service by 32. Yes, that one came more from the White House than from Capitol Hill. We'll see how that ends up in a final package there as well. As expected, making the top rate permanent there of 37% for the individuals. And then the EBITDA for 163J, again, retro to January of this year, January 1st. And then loan deductions again through 2029. And most importantly, it's going to increase that gross receipts limitation from 31 million to 100 million. So that should make more of our NTMA and PMA members eligible for that as well. For those on the fly-in, a few of us went into the Ways and Means Committee, and that's where we spoke about the issue of how to increase the increase from 20%, the Section 199A deductions for you pass-throughs. 65% of our members pay taxes at the individual owner rate as pass-throughs, and so that deduction has been increased in the House from 20 to 23% for the qualified business income. We'll see where the Senate ends up on that, and if it goes even higher, as their effort is to try to reduce and lower that effective pass-through rate at the federal level that many manufacturers are reporting that is higher than many had expected. And of course, increasing the state tax that's on there. A couple of non-tax areas that we've been working on for years, some of us that have been working on the Jobs Act. It does expand the Pell Grants for short term, and that's the 150 hours for 8 to 15 weeks. That's something that we've been to bipartisan legislation that's included in the House bill. We suspect that that will likely also be included in the final legislation. Well, we shouldn't say that. Well, the Senate should be favorable on it, although it could take away from their negotiating leverage for a broader WIOA legislation they were hoping to move later in the year. And you'll notice on the 529 in here how they make some expansions on registered apprenticeship programs and being able to use those there, especially with industry recognized programs. And then on the 127s for additional funding for 5250 would be the allotment there. Lastly, so here's what comes next. Now that we've gotten through the House, that's the baseline on which we think we're going to operate. We move on to the Senate. The House did pass with only a vote to spare. They had 2 Republicans vote against it. The Senate's back in town on Monday. Senate Finance, which is the tax writing committee staff, were meeting this week to go through what they were hoping to get done. The Senate has targeted to move the bill by July 4th. In my meetings yesterday on the Hill, some were thinking it might be just the week after July 4th, but that's in and around the week before or week after or the week of. That seems to be the target for the Senate to move their bill that only needs 51 votes, but they are likely to make some changes which could mean one of two things. Either the House will accept what the Senate does, and that might take them a few weeks to get to enough yes votes, knowing that they're going to have at least one hard no. And at this point, yeah, because they can now afford, I think, four on this, I think is the numbers on the losses. So that's still going to be not much room for Republicans to maneuver there, and then they might reconcile their difference. If you're looking at this, what they did is they increased the debt ceiling by $3.93 trillion, and that's going to have to pass in order to avoid a default on our borrowing. And that timeline could be somewhere in late July, early August. And so if you're looking at when this thing gets wrapped, we'll probably have a better sense here next webinar after we're done with the House, or excuse me, the Senate a little bit closer to being done. Speaking of process here, just a couple quick more things on the Hill before we turn over to Christian and some of the regulatory issues coming from EPA. The House of Representatives is starting to work on their government spending. For you defense contractors, I'm staring at a few names that I know you are. This is a challenge for you. You can see that the defense bill is going to get marked up in the House Appropriations Committee coming up on the 13th, and they're going to get that through. But these bills are unlikely at this point to become law, and we might be looking at a continuing resolution to extend funding, not just later to the year, but some people around town here in DC are talking about extending funding at the FY24 levels for all of next year as well, which would be quite a challenge. Within that reconciliation bill that passed is $150 billion for defense. And around here in the defense community, some are being prepared for that might be the only new spend money that the defense industry receives in the near future, assuming that reconciliation bill passes. So be forewarned on there. And then as our segue over onto the regulatory side here, Congress, and this is destined for the courts, and I know the folks over at Brace will follow this one closely as well, but the Senate did move forward with the Congressional Review Act that would seek to nullify the expansion of the California emissions waiver. Excuse me, went through a joint resolution rather that nullified the EPA notice that allows California to set its own emissions for vehicles that's out there. This is quite significant, as we've got about a dozen of states that clearly follow what California does in this space and in others, but certainly expect this to hit onto the courts that are there as well. But EPA is moving kind of quickly in a few spaces, but Christian, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk through some of that.
Sure. Thanks, Omar. Hello, everyone. So first of all, if you look at the big picture, what's happening on the regulatory side, particularly on environment, energy-related issues in particular, you've got EPA making some major changes in its budget, as well as its own internal massive reorganization effort that's ongoing right now, and it's still not completed yet. But just wanted to note for everyone the not unanticipated, but still rather ambitious cuts to EPA's budget. If you think about defense issues that Omar was just noting, as well as a lot of resources heading to Homeland Security for border security issues in particular, and then you move out to those agencies getting the most significant cuts, EPA at 55% for fiscal year 2026, starting in October. That is a massive reduction. Now, if you look at what that means, a lot of that reduction is coming out of grants and other funds that are available to states for drinking water infrastructure and other kinds of programs. So it doesn't mean a staff cut of that much, but that move, along with EPA's reorganization plans, where they'll be eliminating certain offices and merging others, that probably will leave some staff into the exit channel, to the exit door. But those two pieces are going to both give EPA new opportunities to change the way that they do business, but also other pieces of their program that have been particularly advanced, say under the Biden administration, on environmental justice and other kinds of issues and DEI matters. Those will be dropped. And really on the climate agenda overall, EPA will be eliminating much of its commitments on the climate programmatic side as well. So this is a fairly consequential and tectonic move, and we'll see kind of how all that stays in place on the budget side from Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill often, even under Republican Congresses, will restore money back to EPA's budget from the president's budget. We'll see how all that goes. So very significant platform from which to sort of talk about a few other regulatory and deregulatory items. So next slide. So the first one is EPA's extension of the PFAS reporting period for PFAS manufacturers, importers of substances, PFAS substances, as well as PFAS-containing articles. Huge problems with this reporting rule. The good part is that there's an extension. So most folks will actually have a more lengthy extension into start date of April next year. Small manufacturers that are reporting exclusively as article importers, that is another year or another 8 months extension into 2027. So there's good things about the rule. At the same time, there are still residual problems like it shouldn't include articles. Industry said we shouldn't be seeing reporting on articles, and there is no threshold for de minimis reporting. So it's down to trace levels for manufacturing and importing articles as well. So there are still challenges ahead, but at least we have some room to breathe and come back with both criticisms as well as some further preparation for potential reporting into the future. Next. Also, another large swath of authority from EPA on the water, so-called Waters of the U.S. rule. What is the scope of EPA and federal Army Corps of Engineers authority over water bodies in the U.S.? This has been a big issue, not just for the construction industry, for agriculture, but also for industry manufacturing folks. Also, I think if you look at the main focus of EPA's effort here, it is to try to align EPA's new reading of its authority with a major Supreme Court decision in the so-called Sackett case. There are 2 cases under Sackett, which now have given EPA the opportunity to dramatically, potentially narrow federal authority or federal jurisdiction over a range of different types of water bodies. So from a private property owner standpoint, regardless of what sector of the economy you're in, you will see some potential changes ahead. EPA's had some listening sessions, so-called listening sessions, heard from a lot of different stakeholders. And the most recent one just occurred this week, in the last few days. Lots of participation there, as well as from the agriculture community earlier in May. So stay tuned for more discussion on how far EPA will go and what the timing will be with respect to shoring up authority under the Clean Water Act for waters of the U.S. Also on industrial stormwater, another water office issue. This is a highly problematic rulemaking that was kind of a late entry from the Biden administration. There are 31 sectors of the economy that are potentially regulated under EPA's stormwater program, and 26 out of those 31 are in play for quarterly reporting and monitoring requirements, some potentially significant burdens, and then some potential consequences down the road, depending on what one finds in one's facility, both on a range of pollutant parameters as well as PFAS from their stormwater discharges. So lots of concern on this rulemaking. The comment period just ended, and I think the next step will be talking with EPA about how they're going to either pull this rule or trim it up and give it a bit of the exit ramp before EPA has to meet a deadline of 2027 or 2026 next year to make some decisions here. So we'll see what happens on stormwater. Very wide-ranging potential impacts here, and cost, needless and unjustified cost as well. Never got a small business impact review, and never got reviewed by the White House. So I think EPA is under some expectations to make some changes here. Next. Other item just took place. There were several associations. We just got together and decided to ensure that the White House, with its deregulatory action invitation to industry and others to provide requests or suggestions for deregulation to the White House. One was the request that a number of us filed so that the White House could be more familiar with EPA's hexavalent chromium science document, which essentially would entirely change the way that EPA rules would work in the future to regulate any kind of use or potential emission or discharge of chromium. And we just wanted to make sure that we put this on the White House's board for more attention. EPA has a court order among other required actions that we'll have to take soon to reset the drinking water standards that are in place right now for chromium over the next 2 years or so. So being able to kind of get rid of this document, which is extremely precautionary and deficient, would be very, very, very helpful. So more work to do on that as well. Next. I think the other piece on another metals matter, this is a bit less visible, and I would say quite invisible for lots of folks, even by Washington standards. But the Center for Disease Control has a small agency that by statute has had the authority to put together human exposure profiles and publish documents that guide regulatory agencies in the US, EPA, states across the globe. People use these documents on hundreds of different substances. The particular one for nickel was expected for some years. They just updated it and issued it in 2024. There were also some serious deficiencies and errors there that would essentially set US up for advancing the most restrictive inhalation or air standards for nickel and in other areas as well in the world. So they made some mistakes, they made errors. I think we've tried to make sure that there's an understanding that that they needed to revisit this. So the good news is that just in the last week or so or two, the ATSDR has just pulled off from their website the latest nickel profile, and they are going and revisiting their calculation. So we should see in the coming months some possible changes to that profile. Does impact a lot of metals and related industries. And this is really unprecedented. We haven't seen, at least in my professional lifetime, a profile get pulled. So lots of consequences. Good news in the meantime, monitoring ahead in the next few months. Next. Omar, actually, some of us were just chatting with the new OSHA acting chief and talking with her and the top career people at OSHA. We know that they have a very, very big interest in talking with industry further and collaborating. So with that note on some of our latest discussions, I'll hand it off to you to talk further on OSHA.
Yeah, thank you for that. Quite a bit coming from EPA. And to your point over on OSHA, they are starting to have those OSHA indoor-outdoor workplace proposed rule hearings coming up in a couple of weeks. And we do have both PMA and NTMA scheduled to testify Monday, I think June 23rd is their date in the afternoon for that public hearing testimony that's out there. A few other things coming in from OSHA as well. This is, again, going more in the positive direction, reversing a previous guidelines from the OSHA under the previous administration related to site-specific targeting programs. And this is one of the ways that OSHA would identify for non-construction establishments which ones they wanted to target for potential inspections and reviews. They would be looking at data, including heat incidents and others as part of mostly the 300A. And you can see down below how they've changed and put in some of those different criteria that are now going to be incorporated as when they decide whether or not for some site-specific targeting and for some inspections and developing a program for those facilities as well. In addition to the back and forth, you've seen this now a few times since the president took office in our slide decks, and this relates to the termination in the president's powers to fire independent agencies and also review. This will dovetail in a later Supreme Court, we believe, Supreme Court suit that will deal with whether or not the White House Office of Management and Budget and the OIRA have the ability to review all agency actions and not just some of those select. This one here deals with the termination of a couple of individuals, one on the National Labor Relations Board in Wilcox, and the president was unlawfully removing her, was the claim, and now going back and forth. The Supreme Court does allow that termination and says that it is granted. This is pretty significant and will have lasting impact on the so-called independent agencies, of which there are numerous. This is where you heard about a week ago the interpretation that it does not give him the authority to fire Powell, but at least this would trickle to the other independent agencies that are out there. So this one will have broader effects. Paul, I don't know what your thoughts and what your shop's hearing on that too.
No, we do a lot of work on product safety issues, and the same thing occurred at the Consumer Product Safety Commission. That is an independent agency as well. And because the terms that the 5 commissioners have, that it was actually a 3-2 majority for the Democrats, even though obviously the White House is controlled by a Republican, and the president terminated the 3 Democrats. So now there are 2 commissioners, both Republicans. The 3 Democrats last week sued the Trump administration or filed a lawsuit, and a judge in Maryland they wanted to stay the decision. The Maryland court refused, so it's a different statute. It's actually the Consumer Product Safety Act is created the Consumer Product Safety Commission, but the Democrats still are terminated at this point. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah, so this is one of these areas where, like he said, this is going to have ripple effects throughout the agencies, and couple that with EPA comments made by Christian as well as there. On the independent contractors, this is the guidance that, again, will they or won't they? This has been rolling back multiple times, going back to Obama, Trump, Biden, now Trump again. So they're no longer going to apply the 2024 wage and hour division independent contractor guidance that has been on there in the Fair Label Standards Act under that, where they included the economic reality test and the 6-factor analysis and some of the ABC stuff that California had included that went for whether or not there was some kind of control and all of those areas that are on there. What you need to know is if you do have independent contractors, you need to be clicking on this link and then checking out the guidance that the link will take you to, which was what you see on the right-hand side. And that ultimately will be your new guidance and how you have that relationship moving forward. Also at the National Labor Relations Board meeting, a memo rather that was issued from the Office of General Counsel, they issued February or March, they rescinded a number of general counsel memoranda that were issued under the Biden administration. And this one goes and seeks additional clarification on how you can deal with settlements and non-monetary remedies that are rescinded, and memoranda should not automatically be sought, but typically limited to the cases involved, where there involved widespread, egregious, and severe misconduct. This harkens back to some of just the changes and also finds that the folks were being subject to under the previous administration. And basically, to look at it as a not one size fits all approach coming from the NLRB as well. Over at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, dealing with gender enforcement, this is also a rollback of a previous administration guidance, and it relates to the definition of sex in the workplace, and also dealing with Title VII and denial of access to a bathroom or sex-segregated facility consistent with the individual's gender identity, and then some also harassing conduct and including. So again, if you are having some workplace, if you've got your memo for your guidelines for your employee memo, this is one of those spaces where you, again, in certain circumstances, might need to consult with counsel and see what your legal advice might have in this space in order for you to move forward and update that manual as well. Health savings accounts, just for HR folks, just a quick update for calendar year 2026, the annual limitation on deductions for self-only coverage for high deductibles, $4,400, for family, $8,750. So that's been changed on the annual contributions. And then we also got an update on the high deductible health plans and their definitions that are on here for $1,700 self, $3,400 for family coverage. And then with the cap has that new limit there as well. Please make sure someone in HR has got this one as well there. Just a couple of things here going on. The Small Business Administration, I've got a call Monday morning with SBA. They're trying to change that agency or that department, and they're trying to make it more proactive in a number of spaces. This is one of those examples here on the regulatory hotline that they've developed. They've also got a manufacturing initiative. That's what my call on Monday is about. But right now, they're really trying to make that more than just a backup for 7As and 504s and some of those other loans that are out there. You can see by example here on the onshoring initiative that SBA is running here, and have a SBA sponsored matchmaking platform that you can access through this portal that's clicked down here below, with a focus on manufacturers sourcing components or materials, product-based businesses seeking more reliable inputs, and so on. So that's what the Connex Marketplace seeks to do here, and that's something that's coming out from the Small Business Administration. And with that, a transition over to tariffs, and at any time, welcome others here to jump in, Paul certainly, but this is the back and forth to which Caitlin was referring. Let me just level set where we are. Tariffs on China and the rest of the world as of 12/29 Eastern today are still in place. The tariffs are in place of the 10% on global tariffs, and the combined China tariffs of 30% are still in place. Just to be clear, what the president did on February 4th, the president imposed a 10% tariff on China for opioid reasons. On March the 4th, the president imposed another 10% tariff for the same reasons. On May the 14th, after taking it up 125%, he added effectively another 10%, also under the IEPAs, but that was for the reciprocal reasons. So you've got opioid fentanyl tariffs under the IEPA actions, International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Those were the combined 20% for March and February. Then he added on a reciprocal 10% on China. Also, as part of the reciprocal, he added on the 10% for the entire world until we get to July 9th, and then July 10th, they could pop back in and up higher. So those are the different ones under IEPA. And then you've got the category of Canada and Mexico that have their own. What you look at right now, you have that combined up to and at least usually rate of China at 30% on most products, 10% on most others, and then you still have the 232s. This court action focuses only on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 that the president is using to target countries. This does not impact the Section 232 national security tariffs that the Supreme Court already upheld in 2019, I think it was, that the president has the authority to do so. So this does not impact steel, aluminum, autos, auto parts, or the future product specific tariffs that are being imposed under Section 232 national security. This is specific to the IEPAs. We currently now have them back in place after the Federal Appeals Court here in DC said that they temporarily reinstated the IEPA while the Trump administration has the chance to respond to the lower courts and the Court of International Trade that had ruled that they don't have the authority. Who the challengers are, and Paul can speak to this, but much of the premise relies that under the IEPA of 77, it does not specifically allow the president to take such action. And it doesn't have tariffs. It allows sanctions, it allows other things, but it does not say tariffs in there, and it hasn't been done before. And so that's why they've done now an immediate administrative stay is granted, and then they're going to allow for the plaintiffs here in the case to respond by June the 5th, and the government then is going to respond by June the 9th. Regardless of who loses, this is likely going to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I won't speak for any of those that are involved in the case, but I suspect that it will be, and that means that we are likely, this is me speculating, you will likely see a Supreme Court decision on this, no question, by 12:01 a.m. on July the 10th. I don't know, Paul, what you're hearing from the attorneys, but I would argue that most likely you'd even get a decision before the court breaks for its summer break here, and that usually is going to be the last week of June in the June 23rd, 24th, 25 range. Paul, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think you're right because we'll talk about another lawsuit in a second, but there are 7 lawsuits regarding the tariffs. This decision by the Court of International Trade was pretty sweeping. It as Omar just said, it vacated all the tariffs, said that the president exceeded his authority, and also anybody who paid the tariff would be able to get their money back. However, before everybody starts contacting their trade lawyer or their accountant, there are plenty of other sections of the trade law that the president could reimpose tariffs. And also, as Omar just said, during the appeals process, it took about 24 hours for the appeals court to say, we're going to stay enforcement of this decision while it's under review. And I do think it'll end up in the Supreme Court. Traditionally, the executive branch has gotten a lot of leeway from the Supreme Court to impose tariffs. This particular case is interesting because it does involve the IEPA law, which has never been used before to impose tariffs. Richard Nixon did something related, but the court was pretty adamant that the president exceeded his authority. There was also another case that, so this was in the Court of International Trade, which usually if you have ever dealt with anti-dumping laws or anything and there's an appeal, it goes to the Court of International Trade up in New York. There's also another case, one of the other 7 cases that was heard on Tuesday, and a ruling came out I think it was yesterday, as they started to fold together. This involved the same issue, whether the president exceeded his authority by imposing tariffs under IEPA. And this was brought by a guy in Illinois who used to be my client on product safety issues. And I had lunch with him on Tuesday. There's a guy by the name of Rick Woldenberg who owns both Learning Resources and Hand to Mind. They do educational toys, educational products. They sell to schools and things. They get a vast majority of their products from overseas, a lot of China products, and they and another Washington law firm using a Washington law firm sued the government, and the judge similarly found that the president had exceeded his authority by using tariffs under IEEPA, but he suspended his enforcement of his decision for 14 days to allow him a chance to allow the government a chance to appeal. So, Omar, I agree that things are going to come to a head pretty quickly. The Supreme Court's probably going to have to resolve this before they go out, because it's going to get very confusing, particularly, the Court of International Trade ruling, where a lot of money would be refunded to companies if that ruling stays.
Right, yeah, and doing a post-summary correction, or if you've already had your import liquidated and paid the duties and they've already cleared, then you've got to deal with an appeal. I heard from one lawyer around town that if this actually gets thrown out and you try to get your money back, that's not happening until the end of next year, maybe 2027. So that's quite the process. On the other side of this, the details on the US-UK trade deal were we still don't have it, folks. That's the issue with some of these announcements that have been made. We try not to put much here until we actually see pen to paper that's been signed. So right now we can just go with what the White House has put out on a fact sheet until we get something published by Customs with regard to the deal that the US and the UK reached with regard to the reciprocal tariff. And they're still trying to even lower that even further, is my understanding as of earlier this week from the UK side of things here. They're looking at the first 100,000 vehicles imported into the US by UK manufacturers each year are subject to the reciprocal rate of 10%. And then they allow that to move forward, and then any additional are subject to 25%. So this is one of those where we wonder, is this a precedent setting as well? Do they put in some quota systems into other agreements that they look? The deal creates a new trading union for steel and aluminum. That's something that's pretty significant. We're still kind of waiting to see more details on that as well, since I think that even talking to the steel industry is a little bit different in the reports than what they were led to believe. In addition, this next several slides are going to be for your reference for later. This deals with the tariff stacking executive order that was released to clarify with a particular focus on Canada and Mexico, and effectively saying that no, you're not going to combine the tariffs of steel and aluminum plus the tariffs on autos if there's steel, for example, inside of it. And so these do start to clarify in order in which you should try to apply the different tariff actions that were addressed as we break them down again: 232 autos and parts, then the IEPAs for Canada, the IEPAs for Mexico, and then the 232 steel and 232 aluminums. Here's the flow chart that we put it together for you. So step one is always check for automotive. If you're an automotive, then that's going to be your primary tariff that you retain that's on there. And then it is not going to be subject to the IEPA Canada's, which can be 10 or 25%, IEPA Mexico at 25, or the aluminum steel, which are 25. Then you go to next step two, and you start looking at, does the product appear on the IEPA Canada or Mexico, meaning that if it's not USMCA certified qualifying, then it will have to be subject to those tariffs as well. And then it talks about how they interact with that. So you're not doubling up on Canada and Mexico. That's going to be your test, and how they created this flow chart that you go through here. And then you can see for some of the 5 tariff actions for your actual reference, this is the CBP guidance. If you click below, it'll take you to the Customs and Border Protection, the Cargo Messaging Service, a notification that came out on May the 15th will be in here, but we try to simplify it a little bit over that in that flow chart that you can see. But I will note though, for derivative products subject to both the 232 aluminum and the 232 steel tariffs, duties will be owed on both the value of the aluminum and the steel content of that product. This is an important clarification, as we've gotten emails from some NTMA and PMA members on this, and now the answer from CBP has clarified what initially was not the interpretation around town and from the government itself. So note, if your product potentially now has aluminum but was on the steel list, or aluminum but not on the other, they might be interpreting that as being covered. So read this provision carefully and see how that might apply for you as well. This is now old news. We now know that he dropped for that 90 days. That suspension on China tends to come on the 10%. It's going to jump back up to 125% on or around August the 14th. If they don't reach any agreement on there, especially on the de minimis, this doesn't necessarily apply to most of our members where they're bringing in covered products with a value of under $800, but they now do have a 54% flat rate, and there is no real de minimis options that are available back and forth. But, Paul, I said August 14th being the date that Trump's going to maybe snap the tariffs back up, but I'm not sure he's got patience to last to that long.
Yeah, fresh off Truth Social this morning at 8:09, the president expressed his displeasure at the deal that was cut with China, claiming that China was not holding up their end of the agreement. So as you can see, there's a few all capital words there. So we'll keep you posted on this. It made some. Usually, what happens is he posts something on Truth Social, and then the trade publications start reporting on it, and then we get clarification later about what the president is actually talking about. So we'll keep you posted. And along those lines of similar to the US-UK deal, there were media reports from an interview that Senator McCormick from Pennsylvania had on CNBC that an agreement has been reached on the U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel deal. As you know, the Biden administration had basically said that rejected that deal, and the president Trump was against the deal. But now there are negotiations taking place that involve increased investment by Nippon Steel, a guarantee that there won't be layoffs, and an additional investment in the Pittsburgh area, as well as the opening of a new electric arc furnace facility. And then I think the most interesting is that the U.S. government would be able to pick a number of board members to ensure, and then to ensure, quote unquote, that production levels aren't cut, which it would be a very novel and interesting agreement. And but again, just like other things, no official announcement has been made. Nippon Steel has been pretty quiet on this, so we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, that's right. Clarification here for some folks. I got this question from a client about vessels and when you've got a feeder vessel, if your product has been in transit, but if it's actually moved and loaded onto another vessel, you're going to lose your exemption for in transit. That came on there as well. Aircraft 232 investigation has been launched. So that brings I think we're at 8, maybe 9 232 investigations that are pending right now between the semiconductors and the other ones. Comment periods on all but the aircraft one now, I believe, are closed. We did file comments on the critical minerals one and on copper 232 actions, and they've got, actually, I think heavy duty truck might still be open on medium heavy duty, but they're getting close to closing that one out there as well. The threat over the Memorial Day weekend. 50% tariffs on the EU. Again, we'll see how that plays out between now and July the 9th. And these are also subject to the court cases and their review there as well. As usual, we're just the only one we'll really speak to here is just the next one for Paul, but we do like to put in some information, especially we just received a question. Is there any data showing the Section 232 tariffs are protecting the U.S. steel market? From what I have seen, foreign melt from Asia is still cheaper than domestic melt. I mean, Paul, if that wasn't a segue written just for you, I don't know what it is.
A perfect timing, and I appreciate that question. So this is this hot rolled steel benchmarker chart, and I flag the price difference, the U.S. price, EU price, and China price. And while it's not shown here, the utilization rate, which is one of the things that both the Biden and the Trump administrations measure success by, that they are always trying to get an 80% utilization rate for steel production, it's still hovering around 77%. It hasn't changed very much. in the last several months. The gap between U.S. prices and the rest of the world, as you saw, has continues to increase. It dipped a little bit as of late, but we keep pretty close track of this. I don't think you're seeing a ton of evidence. We've had some announcements of steel plants, one in, I believe, in Louisiana, that was announced. So we're tracking this, and we're going to keep reporting on it. Anybody interested in steel prices and the comparison, because as we always say, it's really the most important thing is the difference between what you pay as a manufacturer and what your competitors overseas pay. And we saw that gap increase a great deal in the last several reports, and it remains pretty wide compared to, as you can see from the chart, compared to previously. And this chart, by the way, tracks everything back from 2018 when the original steel and aluminum tariffs were imposed. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah, and I did see there's a smelter that was announced out in Oklahoma. We'll see. We have either 3 or 4 right now, aluminum smelters, I think, something like that in the country. We're going to try to wrap up here in the next 60 seconds. So if you all have any other questions, please do feel free to type them in here. Again, those of you that with a Bloomberg subscription, you might have seen some of these that come out here, that they aggregate some of the data on some manufacturing activity and where we're looking on some of those that are out there. As always, there's multiple ways to stay connected with us. We've got our podcast that we get more into the political season stuff and give you more real-time updates on what's happening on the taxes and the trade side. Please be on the lookout. We're going to have an action alert that goes out this week, coming week rather, to call on the Senate to make those tax provisions permanent for R&D, for bonus, 199A, many of those tax provisions that we discussed earlier, and to get those going out there. Please do respond and get those messages in. They do make a difference, as do your donations to the programs that allow these webinars and our program here in Washington, D.C. and advocacy to happen. Please do donate as you can. And with that, we're happy to wrap up. We know we went a little bit long, but there's a lot happening, as you can imagine, in D.C., especially when it comes to the trade and tariffs changing virtually daily. We'll hang on here for about another 60 seconds to answer any questions as they may come in. As always, this has been recorded and is going to be sent out along with a slide deck later this afternoon. Go ahead, give folks just another few seconds. We are going to do our next webinar on Friday, June the 27th at noon Eastern. And then we'll be getting a little bit more clarity, hopefully, on some of the court cases and where we are right now. All right. Thanks all. Have a good weekend.